Well, hello everybody. I wanted to come on here and do a quick live stream, Facebook live stream, concerning the Lord's Supper, the digitizing of the Lord's Supper, the virtual administration of the Lord's Supper. There's all kinds of funny ways we could say it. And this has been an idea that has been floated more and more, increasingly in fact, by churches all over the country as a result of the lockdowns and the shutdowns caused by the COVID-19 pandemic scare and the local and state governmental reactions to that. So the question is, can the Lord's Supper be administered over the internet? Like, could you jump on a Zoom call with your pastor, and then your pastor, you have your own little, your little grape juice or wine and your cracker at your house, and then your pastor has his, and everybody's got theirs, and they're all tuning in from their own homes individually, and they're being brought together in a Zoom session, and they partake of the Lord's Supper together, right? Can that happen? Is that the right way to think of the Lord's Supper during this difficult and confusing time? And the answer, I would say, is no. Now, there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is a theological presupposition that I have called the regulative principle of worship. It means that the regulative principle of worship basically states that you don't fall short of and you don't go beyond what the Scriptures have instituted insofar as worship is concerned. In other words, God sets the standard for worship, and we don't go beyond that standard, and we don't hopefully fall short of it. Now, we do fall short of it, but the primal thing to remember in regard to the regulative principle is that we don't invent worship. We don't invent ways to worship. We worship according to the Scriptures. Now, a lot of Baptist churches also are the ones advocating for the idea of taking the Lord's Supper over the internet, which is odd to me because the very hermeneutic that they use to get to baptism, or the doctrine of baptism, is the very hermeneutic that would forbid them from administrating the Lord's Supper over the internet. And the reason I say that is because, well, how do we come to our doctrine of baptism? Well, by the Scriptures. We say, well, there's no command in the Scriptures to baptize infants. There's only command in the Scriptures, there's only example in the Scriptures to baptize professing believers, okay? Now, I don't want to make this video Baptist specific, even though I am a Baptist, but I just want to show how Baptist churches are being inconsistent with their very own hermeneutic, because they will turn to something like the Lord's Supper and see all the examples of the Lord's Supper taking place during in-person fellowship, and then they will still say, well, we can augment it, we can change it just this once, and we can do something different that the Scriptures have not indeed commanded. Well, the question then becomes, well, why do you hold so fastly to the doctrine of baptism that you hold to? Now, the text that I will go to is going to be Acts 2:42, which is one of the biblical examples, right, that we have. And Acts 2:42 just says, and they continued. Another word for that is persevered. This is a means of perseverance. This is a means of grace, right, which is why I have been vehemently opposed to canceling worship. And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship. Now, fellowship in Bible times was being together in person with one another, within arm's reach, right? I mean, you're in the same locale as your other brothers and sisters. So they continue the apostles' doctrine and fellowship in the breaking of bread, and that's an allusion to the Lord's Supper. Okay, that's the allusion to the institution of the Lord's Supper that Jesus Christ himself instituted before the account of the Passion. And so they persevered steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, being together, and while they're together, they're breaking bread. Okay, they're partaking of the Lord's Supper. So you have to ask yourself, well, if the example of doing the Lord's Supper over the internet is not found in the Scriptures, do we do it that way? And the answer is absolutely not. Now, we're not talking about, medicine or pharmaceuticals. Since we have no example in the Scriptures of people taking medicine, we shouldn't take medicine, right? Well, no. because this would go back to a doctrine of the sufficiency of Scripture. We say that the Scripture is sufficient for all faith, all our faith, our doctrine, and moral living, our living unto God, in other words, which is how theology has been classically defined. So in regard to our worship, we need to be asking the question, what do the Scriptures command us to do? And we don't go beyond that. We don't invent our own ways to do that. And it's shameful to see churches going to a digitized model of worship as kind of this plan B option, as kind of a way to get around the shutdowns, but also try to obey Scripture, but they're not obeying Scripture because that's not what Scripture commanded. So, and then there are some that just stopped worshiping altogether. They're like, well, if I have to violate Scripture and violate, in appeasing the federal authorities, then we're just not going to worship at all. Which I would disagree with that approach as well. Needless to say, the Lord's Supper cannot be taken at a distance or during a time of estrangement of the body. It cannot be taken apart from the local church assembly. And that assembly is the gathering together, the assembly of God's people. Now, if you say, well, we are assembling over Zoom. Well, why haven't we just been doing conference calls like all the way since the 90s? We could just assemble that way through conference calls, right? Well, no, because biblical fellowship, biblical assembly is intimate, in-person fellowship. Guys, this is on Facebook, but also I'm going to upload this to my YouTube channel, so if you would like to see it there, please move over to the YouTube channel and check it out. God bless you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day.